Hey everybody, we're going to get started in just a few minutes. We're going to let everyone get logged in here. Looks like people are all jumping in right now, so sit tight and we'll get started. Thank you. Okay, everyone, we're going to get started. So welcome to our 3:30 session today. So what are you saying? The value of plain language. I'm glad you all could be here today. We've got about 188 people logged into the session right now, and it's climbing quickly, so we'll see many people come on. My name is Jim Ostrowski. I work in Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy's Environmental Support Division. Just going to run through some housekeeping, and I'm going to turn over to Jennifer. First of all, most of you who have attended previous sessions today know the lines are muted, and we're also recording the session, and we posting those sessions up on the agenda on the event website as soon as we can. Some of them are already posted, and we'll be posting the rest by tomorrow, so you'll be able to see them then. If you want to ask a question during today's session, you can type it into the Zoom toolbar using the Q&A box. If you're on Whova, which I know a lot of you are, you can also put your questions in Whova, and we'll be checking that chat as well. With that, I'll turn it over to Jennifer. Take it away.
Thanks a lot, Jim. Much appreciated. So thanks everybody for joining us today. I'm really excited to talk about this session. Jim is actually my boss. I work at EGLE as well. And if you've been to any of Air Quality Division's public meetings, or even some ones that were maybe water or multimedia related, you might have seen me before. So just kind of letting you know that that's where I'm coming from. And I'm excited to talk to you about a project that we've done in the agency recently. We were actually contacted, and they'll talk about this a little bit more, by U of M, and they asked if we would like to participate in this plain language project, because anyone who's read anything from EGLE, maybe in the past, hopefully not as recently, realizes that we have a lot of sciencey speak and a lot of technical language that is sometimes challenging to break down so that just regular people can understand it. Everyone's really, really busy. And when we want people to participate in our process, or we want people to understand about the work we do and how it affects them, we want to speak to them in a way that everybody can understand, bringing things down to a level that are simpler terms and are not a lot of acronyms and things like that, that just create these barriers that we don't want. So we're really excited to be involved with this project. And so today who I have with us is Sam Lukman, and she's going to talk a lot about things from a community perspective. She's going to talk about some of the barriers that communities see when they see some of our documentation, some of our things on our website and things like that, and how that makes community members feel about interacting with us, and how that looks for them. And then she's going to pass it on to Natalie Sampson, who was actually one of the team members that worked with us on this plain language project. She's really instrumental with some of her group on bringing in stakeholders to look at some of our materials and basically tell us, this thing is not doing the job that you want it to do. So here's how we would suggest that you fix it. And we're going to talk about one of the documents that we use all the time in particular, and that is our public notice. So when we have things that we want the public's input on, we put out these notices, and we realized that they were really just not cutting the mustard, so to speak. So Natalie's going to talk a little bit more about the project in detail. And then at the end, we're going to bring in April Wendling, who is EGLE's Detroit Air Quality District Supervisor. And she's going to talk a little bit about some of the lessons that we learned from this project, how we made some changes, and then what we're going to be doing in the future. And hopefully I'm going to stop talking so that we can have some time for questions at the end. So Sam, if you want to go ahead and take it away anytime at your leisure.
Hi. Just to introduce myself, my name is Samra Lookman. I've lived in the south end of Dearborn, which is the southeasternmost part of Dearborn, for about 30 years, a long time without giving away my age. I do want to go ahead and talk about specifically my area, but in general, the details that I describe about my area are things that most minority, impacted communities face as well. So to start with, just a little bit of a brief history on the South End specifically. Everybody knows that Detroit is the Motor City. However, the F-150, the nation's #1 selling vehicle, is built right on Miller Road, excuse me, in the heart of the South End, which Biden today went and visited. Going back 100 years, there's an explosion of the automobile industry into the economy, which resulted in the descending of about 42 major and minor source polluters to this area. Over time, the South End had an influx of immigrants and minorities, and that was to fill Ford Motor Company's insatiable appetite for cheap labor, as well as from war and turmoil in the Middle East, along with the now illegal practice of redlining, which boxed these minorities into areas of toxic exposure, as well as de facto segregation. The area has predominantly been an immigrant community since its dawn. Next slide. All these factors have created the perfect storm, a recipe for one of the worst examples of environmental racism in the state and nation. The area is now 95% Yemeni, is majority low income, majority limited education, and majority limited English speaking, which is a reflection, as I said, of most other similarly impacted communities. It brings us to today's topic of the need for breaking down of language into the simplest terms between the state and the people that it's meant to protect. Next slide. So EGLE's developed a plan, a limited English proficiency plan. As a condition of receiving some federal aid, it is to provide meaningful access to limited English speakers in activities that involve general public contact, as well as in programs directly administered by the agency. However, the plan has a couple of significant deficiencies. First, notices don't go out in the native tongue of the impacted communities, in spite of EGLE's knowledge of those communities. لو أني قلت لكم الآن بسممكم بس اتصلوا بي لو تحتاجوا مترجمة. What I just said is, I'm going to poison you, but call me if you need an English translation. That's essentially what the state is doing right now. They're not providing a statement, even a statement into their notices that they can provide a translation. Additionally, in the noticing, the state still does nothing to educate those communities about administrative processes or rules governing permits. So people end up ill-equipped and ignorant of their rights at public hearings, and they're wholly uninterested in civic engagement. And then, ironically, those same people are blamed for lack of involvement and participation. Lastly, the state's notices are further heavily loaded with technical terminology that's difficult even for educated people to understand. As a resident, and a smart one at that, I've had to spend countless hours researching how to contest the permit, what various components did, how different chemicals affected my body, and it should never be that way. It makes us feel like the system was set up for us to fail, as if you're directly targeting our communities knowingly in order to allow these companies to essentially get away with murder by poisoning. To highlight the importance of language and how words matter, at one point I was discussing this topic with EGLE cohorts, and one said, please don't make this presentation, quote unquote, sound like a bitch fest, which to me exemplifies the deafness of the state to the seriousness of our issues and concerns. It makes us feel like even during an environmental justice conference, the state is just going through the motions of pretending to care, but they really don't want to hear it. Words matter, language matters. And that said, I do still want to thank the state for taking the initiative to even develop this plan. It goes to show that there are individuals that do care. Which brings me to the next speaker, Dr. Natalie Sampson of the University of Michigan.
Thank you so much, Sam. I've enjoyed getting to know you these last few years, and I've just learned so much from you, and I appreciate everything you just shared. We can't talk about any of this without covering this history and understanding how we got to this status quo. So Samra noted, for communities affected by cumulative exposures and impacts, engagement in environmental decision-making related to permits, land use, zoning, it's a constant. And so, oops, sorry about that, folks. All right, is that better? And so I'm going to talk about plain language, which might seem like a totally different topic than what we were just focused on in terms of EJ, but in fact, it's central to this work, as Samra alluded to. And so, you know, I argue that it's a lens, it's a tool, it's not a magic silver bullet that's going to address all of our environmental justice and environmental racism issues. But if we want to get to meaningful participation, we want to understand what industries and agencies are up to, we have to be able to understand what those documents say. And so when you hear plain language, you may have, you might think about health literacy, you might think about simple ways of saying things, but really plain language is about meeting everybody's needs, meeting the audience, the reader's needs. I like this definition on the bottom left. Plain language is a lens that centers the needs of the reader in creating communication material. So it is a tool for everyone. And here's some other definitions from the Federal Plain Writing Act of 2010, the International Plain Language Federation. And so this is not something new per se, but it is something that our federal and state agencies have struggled with for a long time. You can actually go to the Center for Plain Language's website and you can learn about how they grade our agencies. And I will say that our EPA, HUD, Department of Transportation are not getting A+ on how they communicate out their work to the public. So here's what we did. We decided to pull together a group from ERA, the Environmental Health Research to Action team that I work with Samra on, reach out to consultants at the Clear Language Lab in Chicago and meet with EGLE and start to talk about what are in these documents that are put out to the public notices, project summaries. And so to do that, it was partly just looking at the documents and reviewing them together, but it was also bringing in EJ leaders. It was also bringing in legal advocates. For those of you who've worked on these issues on the ground, you know that we rely heavily on environmental lawyers to try to help navigate the legalese that's in these documents. And then finally, taking new versions of the documents to adult learners who were not primary English speakers to see how is that coming across and is it making sense? And so we relied on the Clear Language Lab a lot for understanding what plain language means and what it looks like in terms of design, in terms of content. And we learned a lot. We had a series of themes from these focus groups. I'm just going to read some of the most powerful quotes. So someone said, I mean, how are you going to give somebody something that they can't understand and say, well, we gave them notice, but you giving them something, you know, they can't understand? What impact do public hearings actually have? And then the people, we don't understand the laws anymore because every time we think we have a law that's protecting us, the laws are weak. And so we're going ahead, reading all the technical stuff and our hands are still tied by the laws and that state agencies are utilizing to continue to do business as usual. So that's status quo. It could be presented in a better way that is more attractive to readers and easier to follow. So it's difficult reading. And if people don't know, they're going to push it aside because they don't understand and can't comprehend it. Another quote, too long, disordered, unclear purpose. It goes from talking about diesel fire emergency and then it's back to talking about other things. It doesn't coincide, going from one place to something else. So this is just a smattering of some of the quotes, but I can talk about some of the themes that came out in this process. You know, part of it was it's confusing. There's writing issues, right? So we can fix those more simply, change words, we can reorganize things, we can design things differently. But as you can imagine, this process really illuminated problems with public participation in these processes, in these environmental decision-making processes. So, you know, by the choice of language, by the choice of what was included and what was left out, EJ leaders, legal advocates, and others commented on, you know, who is this document communicating to? Who is it being transparent with? Why don't I know how it's affecting my health? Cumulative impacts, things like that. So for example, there was one permit to install document that said the AQD has reviewed the PTI application and prepared a proposed permit. If the proposed permit is approved, it will ensure the facility meets the applicable air quality requirements. Therefore, we are recommending approval of the proposed permit. So immediately, as we talked through these documents in the focus groups, we said, well, what's the point of the public hearing? You just said that this will be approved, right? And so there was oftentimes a lot of confusion about the process, about, okay, if I comment on this, is there anything you can do for me? Why am I participating in this process? And so the choice of what's included, the choice of what's not included, the bias towards industry, these were all things that came out by just putting this plain language lens on these documents. So I'm going to switch it to April here, and I'm going to let April talk a little bit about some of the changes that EGLE's been working through in the example that Jen mentioned earlier, and then I'll bring it back with some final takeaways.
Okay, well, first of all, I'd like to thank both Sam and Natalie for that excellent segue, and welcome to my home in Carlton, Michigan. And I am April Wendling, and as Jennifer said, I am the district supervisor for EGLE's Air Quality Division Detroit office. And it is very much my honor to be a part of this event, and I very much look forward to addressing all of you. So what I would like to do, take a look at this first slide. We'll get into that in just a second. But before we start, I would just like to say I think it's important that I mention that I do have a PhD in public health. That's not important for this slide, but it's important because I would like to think, after spending all that time in education and money, especially the money part, that I am somewhat semi-moderately able to read. And what I would like you to do when you take a look at this slide is, do you find this particular document, this public notice, inviting? Do you just want to dive right in and read this particular document? Well, I know that I don't, and there's a number of reasons. What I'd like to do, I don't know if you can see it clearly or not. I'm only going to read one sentence from it. I promise I won't read any more than that. But I'd like you to listen just to the first sentence, and then we will further delve into this slide. And the first sentence says, the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality, which is what we are now EGLE, of course, is holding a public comment period from September 20th, 2018 until October 22nd, 2018, and a public hearing, if requested, on October 25th, 2018, for Godot McSteel Incorporated, proposed modifications to their existing steel mill, and for DET Electric St. Clair power plants, request to reduce their allotted nitrogen oxide emissions, which will provide emission offsets for the proposed Godot project. Now, that being the first sentence, that just didn't encourage me to read on. And I'm sure with me reading that, I was just about out of breath. I kind of needed a break from that. So it certainly doesn't encourage me to read further. And just by looking at this particular document, I think that it has set up in the classic way. It's not just EGLE's issue, this type of thing. I'm also going to blame all technical professions that suffer from this same thing. I mean, I'm sure there are lawyers out there, and we all know the term legalese, so you know what your issues are as the medical profession and business people as well. So it's something that we all need to work on, but I can't help with the other groups, but we're going to try to help EGLE in this way. Looking at this document, we certainly could use a better title as to exactly what is going on, because air pollution instead of an air permit, that's what we're taking a look at, the air permit. What you can look at by this document is it's not inviting. There's no white space. There's no breaks. It's kind of a buried treasure setup that is not going to encourage people to read. You're going to have to really dig in and try to find what you're looking for. And most people do not have the time and the desire. You really want to, especially this day and age, you really want to be able to scan something and kind of speed read and get to where the part that you're really interested in looking at and gaining information from. In addition, if you were to read this, and I promised I wasn't going to read beyond the first sentence, and I'm not, you've got a document that is filled with all kinds of jargon and terms that are very hard to understand. So it's not just simply reading this particular document. You're going to probably spend an awful lot of time on the internet looking up all these terms, and you're not going to feel like burning the midnight oil in order to do this. Another issue is you can see that there's too much detail for people to simply sift through. I mean, where you need to send information or ask to get information from. So those things are all issues there, and what we wanted to do is work with EJ groups and the University of Michigan to find out how we can provide the information that's needed in these public notice documents, but yet make things simpler to understand. Now that's assigned on the bottom by Annette Switzer, and she also has she's also presenting at this conference. So please see her presentation if at all possible. So next slide, please, Natalie. Okay, so these are some of the recommendations that we got, is to be able to have a clear introduction and of agency and purpose and process. And that was one of the just simply, even starting out, just a title being something that people can understand is very important. What you can see, some of the other suggestions here is have a hierarchy of information that is going along that is easy to follow, and the overview area is grayed out, so you can pick out things quickly that you are looking for. You can see there's an overview that this is a public comment period. That's very clear. The company that is involved and exactly what they want to do. You also, as moving down, you're going to be able to tell us what you think of any of these issues, and who to contact and where, and particularly the added visual such as the map that's above. People requested that commonly, and icons that are on the bottom left. Next slide, please. So what we actually did, and I think if you remember the first slide that you took a look at, how kind of jam-packed, as I said, buried treasure that was presented in that first slide. This is much different. It tends to be much more inviting. We've got a better title describing what is going on, notice of air permit comment period. We have a lot more white space, and we did actually have a hierarchy of information, and it was very, very clear where you can provide comment, by what date that comment is needed, and where to get a hold of individuals that you would want to contact. Okay, next slide. And some of the other additional things that we've done, of course, is we have maps that you can click on. That was a very, very popular feature. We have very clear icons. Again, the white space issue is just very important. It doesn't seem like it would be, but it's very important to have a document that is actually very inviting to read. And again, a clear hierarchy of what is being talked about, and where you can get additional information, and who you can contact. So you can quickly, and the bullet points also, I mean, which make things a lot easier. So you can quickly access the information you need and not even have to read the whole thing if you're looking for something specific, which is also very important for people that are busy. Plain language is very important. One of the things that at EGLE I want to stress is we do not consider plain language a process of dumbing down for the public. That is not what we are doing here. That's not what we think we're doing. That's not what we want to do. As a matter of fact, it simply is good for all of us. And there have been major surveys done on plain language, and it has found out, and I'm reading here from some of the documents, that in science, technology, medical fields, it has been discovered that even highly educated online readers crave succinct information that is easy to scan. And I think that's very, very important today. I know it's important for me. As I said, I have a PhD in public health, and I had trouble reading this and certainly didn't have the time to want to do that. Plain language is simply good customer service and makes life easier, not only for the general public, but for our any business. Now, what do we plan to do at this point? I've kind of, in the brief time that we've had, shown what EGLE has done so far, but we've got a lot further go. And what we would like to plan to do in the near future is to continue to better understand what communities want and need. And what that could possibly mean, what I want it to mean personally, is to have meetings not just when there are, hearings or, comments or, things regarding permits, but so that we can have a more free dialogue between the community to find out what are your needs and what do you expect? What do you really want to know? And so that goes beyond just having a hearing, getting to that point. And also what I think is very important, and I've heard both Samara and Natalie mention it, and it's very important to me, is to be able to convey to communities what the Eagle and Air Quality Division can and cannot do under the law. And I don't know how clear that is to people, and I think that's very important. And to be able to understand our processes together. I know I heard a comment that permits are just, blanket approval. It's a lot more complicated than that. And what goes on behind the scenes, I think we have to do a much better job of making clear. So I look forward to meeting that challenge. I think we also need to continue in the areas of limited English proficiency. We've just kind of started down this path. We have had things in a number of different languages, particularly Spanish and Arabic. There have been some others as well. There have been issues with, even though you have something in a language, maybe the people that speak the language don't read it. That has been an issue. Dialect has been an issue. I know myself personally, I went up and down the streets of Hamtramck delivering things in numbers of different languages and just actually walking down the streets and going into different markets and talking to people, and would they put it in their market? Would they post it? Would they put it on their website? So those are the things that we would like to continue to be able to do. So in conclusion, I guess what my parting thought would be, plain language is not something that is a fad, but is a necessity, and it has big payoffs for not only the general public, but for organizations as well. So I want to continue improving in this area and look forward to receiving comments from people on how we can help you better understand what we do. It is technical, but that doesn't mean we can't put it in terms that everybody can understand. And I also challenge our legal and medical and business brethren to do the same. So with that, I pass it back to you, Jennifer.
Yeah, thanks a lot, April. I think, Natalie, you wanted to have like a follow-up after April was finished, I believe. So if you want to just finish up there, and then we can get to some Q&A.
Yeah, and Samara should jump in, or April, as I summarize some key takeaways from the project. So the last slide, and I think in the Whova you can get to the actual report, and there's a bit.ly link that you can get to it easily, but you'll see many more examples. I'll caution that they are not necessarily gone through the EGLE system, and so they were merely suggestions from outsiders on other ways to change the documents. But I really appreciate April and her colleagues' commitment to jumping all in and noting that this work has been going on, and we were not the first to bring this up, but there's some examples in there of maybe ways we could speak to health, or maybe ways we could speak to cumulative impacts in ways that are left out at this point. And so continuing to push beyond, again, as April mentioned, not just word choices, but what are we being transparent about? What can we be accountable to? And so these are a couple other themes of our findings that came out. So FOIA, many of you know, is an opportunity to access information and data that is not necessarily publicly available. So we learned a lot about kind of how complicated that process can be. So we just want
So Natalie, I don't want to interrupt you, but because you just used an acronym, I'm going to ask you to please define FOIA for us all, if you don't mind.
Sure, of course, right? Freedom of Information Act. So this was one thing we heard from legal advocates was, if people are trying to get information from our state and federal government, they file paperwork, and that there's not a lot of transparency in that process and consistency in that process. I think number two has been alluded to several times. There's this idea that if we actually put things in plain language first, it would be easier to translate them, right? And so some of the technical jargon and some of the scientific jargon don't necessarily translate the same way and simply. And so this is, again, another step in moving in the right direction. Also been alluded to, but want to reemphasize that most of these EJ challenges cannot be addressed in one jurisdiction at one level. And so helping folks understand where they have folks to turn to, whether that be, you know, this is about zoning or a odor or noise ordinance that's in your local community versus this is something the state can do versus something the EPA needs to do. I think there's a lot of mystery and we can demystify some of that. Of course, stronger connections with community, you know, co-developing these decisions, creating opportunities for self-determination for communities to be able to come up with processes that work for them. And then really honing in on tone and neutrality and thinking about, you know, what is this document? Who is it speaking to? And what is it conveying and what is it leaving out? And I think those are some big takeaways. So again, I want to thank the EGLE team. There's a small group who committed to working on this project, and they were all in and they've been working on some of this stuff for a while. I did get a sense that there's a larger agency that is going to take a minute to come along with them. And so I hope that this presentation and this report and the work that their colleagues are doing will be inspiring to them to understand that, you know, if we don't address this issue, we are perpetuating these systems in inequity. And so given that this conference is about addressing environmental racism, I hope that you take the simple step, if you haven't already, to learn a bit more about what plain language is. So I will stop there and see if Samra wants to add anything to these final points.
You always hit the nail on the head. So thank you, Natalie. I do think that you've hit most of the things that are necessary in, you know, in breaking down the barriers. There is a little bit, as I noticed in one of the questions, about, you know, transgressing cultural boundaries in order to speak to people in ways that they can understand. And that is also important because there are often times that idioms are used or things are used to mean something else that people don't understand when you translate it verbatim. So that's another thing that we can talk about, probably have a bigger conversation on, as far as like translating words into, you know, crossing those cultural lines. But for your presentation specifically, you know, hitting on logistics of the way things are presented, the use of words that are put into those presentations, that would be the first step in making things so much easier for people. At this point, like I said before, there's a few things that are still lacking in like the notices that are provided, but otherwise, I think that EGLE is doing a great job in taking those first steps.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having those last thoughts. And I know we do have some time for questions, thank goodness, because there are some. But I do want to say I appreciate that it's not closure. This project was it was a big project, and it was almost a year long, and it was great, but it was awesome because it really opened up a lot of EGLE staff's eyes to not just the fact that words matter, which I feel like I say all the time to everyone, is words matter, but it also was the impact of those words and how those things can be so far reaching, and that these small things that we're doing, I mean, the notices of hearing, the one that April showed in the beginning where when I first got this job back in 2015, I looked at that and I was like, what are we doing? And we do have some limitations because some of our notices have to be put in print in a newspaper, and we can't necessarily do all the things that we want to do in that newspaper that we would do, you know, normally on a website or something like that, or in a printed document where we can make it look a little bit better. We have to, you know, kind of stick with those strictures, but we're pushing things as much as we can in those directions. So, and it's not just the public notice. That wasn't the only thing that we're changing. We just really wanted to highlight that in this talk today because we just had 45 minutes, but we're really trying to implement this change to more plain language, more everyday use of words to as many of our public facing documents as we can. And, you know, we might not work at a glacial speed in government, but right now I feel like we're a racing snail. If anybody ever saw Never Ending Story, there's racing snails in there. And that's kind of where I feel like we are right now with this. So we're definitely pushing forward as much as we possibly can. And we have a lot of great advocates in our agency to help us with that. So I want to get to some Q&A, and I want to actually read this note first from Huva, which I really appreciate. And Sam, this is to you. And it's not really a question, but I want to just make sure that I share this with you so you see it. And it says, thank you to Sam Lukman for sharing so frankly. I know that many in my neighborhood on the east side of the Detroit area have had similar experiences attempting to access the information being shared by EGLE. So it's not a rare occurrence that we hear this. We hear this very frequently at our public meetings, and we're always striving to do better. So I appreciate Sam's advocacy when it comes to that. So here was another, and I think this is a question, but it's also more like a comment. And it says, I wonder to what extent the difficulty of the language in notices is intentional to the benefit of the economic interests of those submitting the proposals. So I guess to speak to that, and April, you can chime in a little bit, but I know since you haven't been here quite as long as I have, I might be better to answer that. And, EGLE staff write those notices, but I know when April had talked to how permits happen, and we can talk about this if you come to the next session at 5:15. We're going to be talking about meaningful engagement and that public participation process. So you'll learn a little bit more there about how a company decides to get a permit. They want a permit, they need a permit because they want to change something, and they do an application to us. And then once we go through that whole process, what can sometimes take over a year to review, then we write that notice basically saying, here we've looked at all the rules and regulations. We want your input on this. And so, we're always open to comments too. If anyone on this session right now has looked at some of those and has some specific comments, please feel free to send them in, good, bad, ugly. We'll consider all of them. So some other questions in the Zoom app here.
I can add to that one.
Yeah, sure. Go right ahead.
I think what the person was trying to say, and I'm not going to put words in anybody's mouth, but I echo the sentiment, is how is it that this system is set up so conveniently for corporations and for, different entities to be able to easily obtain these permits? And how is it that this system can be set up so easily to make it difficult for the people who are minorities, the people who are less educated or have English problems? How it's so convenient that it was made to be so difficult for these minorities. And I think the person wasn't just asking a question per se, because we know that there are good people in EGLE and they are following the rule book, but there's a problem with the rule book that is making it so skewed towards one direction, towards one entity being able to easily go through the process and making it difficult for all these other people, this minority, to be able to speak up or to understand what is going on around them. So I don't think it was necessarily a technical question. It was more, I think, of a comment on, the way things are right now.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thanks a lot, Sam, for chiming in on that one, for sure. I know a couple of people asked for the report link to be put in the chat, and Natalie, thank you for doing that. Greatly appreciated. So, all right, we've got quite a few questions in here. I want to make sure that I get to ones that are going to be for Natalie and Sam here for sure. Okay, and some of them are just a little bit unrelated to what we're talking about right here. So this question says, are there additional resources available at public hearings if requested, such as live translation and sign language? That's a great question as well. If we do always put a note in the public notice that if anybody needs accommodation for sign language or something like that, we'll definitely accommodate. We don't necessarily have that at our public meetings right now as a matter of course. So it is something that we have to request because we don't have someone just on staff that does that. We've also offered live translation in a sense, and we're trying to get better at that at some of our public hearings as well. We when we know that there is a need, or we know we're going to be in a community where we have a lot of interest from limited English proficiency communities, we will have folks there that can help ask and answer questions in multiple languages. Mostly we're doing Arabic and Spanish right now, but I know in some of ours we have had Yemenis and Bangladeshi as well. So we're trying to get help with some of the sessions earlier where we talk about our EJ screen. So we're using these tools a lot more effectively now than we have in the past. So we're hoping that some of those steps will get better when it comes to that. Someone asked, can we have access to a copy of the public notice that we shared? Is it posted somewhere on the Whova site? If so, where? So it's not posted on the Whova site, but I can definitely share in the chat where you can find our information on our public notices. And that's another thing that we're working on, is trying to get all of those in one place, but I can definitely share that in a little bit here as well. Okay. So this question says, I have had a very difficult time getting email responses from EGLE team members, nor do I ever receive a return phone call regarding my inquiries. This to me is the ultimate in communication failure. I appreciate the efforts you are all making with the written word and the word on the screen, but simple interaction would be so helpful. So yes, definitely point taken. If you ever have problems with that and you're really not getting a response, you can always reach out to myself or even April Wendling. We definitely can put you in touch with the right people. I know I talk to people on the daily. Sam and I have had a lot of conversations on the phone for things too. So we definitely have, most of our staff are pretty open to having those kind of conversations. But I agree, a lot of times I can't put into words what I could better just speak to. So I appreciate that comment as well.
Well, Jennifer, if I could make a
yeah,
comment
go
on
ahead,
that.
April. Sure.
I know that I don't know this person's particular experience, and that always happens in an organization at some point or another. But I know my staff answer tremendous amounts of emails and phone calls, many times in things that don't even pertain to our organization, and they get them, directed to the, going down the right avenue so that they get with organizations that can help them. So many times we not only answer questions from EGLE, but we direct people to getting to the proper place. So I know there's an awful lot of those.
Yeah, that's a really good point too. It just, this question that reminds me, because somebody said, hey, are you guys trying to get your website a little bit more user friendly? And I'm paraphrasing the question because yes, we are. But if you are ever on EGLE's website and you are looking for something, even if it's not an air quality related thing, just call me, because I'll tell you where it is, because I know our website is crazy. And I know Sam and I have had that conversation as well. And I think I've sent her like lists of links like, hey, this is what you're looking for. We know our website is really challenging. It's even challenging to staff. But I want to get to one more question because I'm checking our time here and I want to make sure I'm respectful of that. And this goes to you, Natalie. This talks about kind of towards the end of your talk there, you talked about neutrality. And the asker says, can you expand on the last point about neutrality? I'm not sure I understand what you're talking about. So I don't know if you can kind of think back to what you were talking about at that time and expand on that a little bit.
Sure. And I think actually Samra's points that she made about an earlier question get to the neutrality piece, right? About kind of, as these documents are created, this process is kicked off by an industry, a facility wanting either to install something to pollute more or to expand, right, or renew their permit. And so that entails documenting what they're up to and what they're agreeing to commit to in terms of monitoring and all those things. And so a lot of that language is not always spelling out, how will this affect the community's health? How will this affect the cumulative impacts in that neighborhood? Instead, it's really kind of spelling out the logistical, technical information, and sometimes not including stuff that might be meaningful to a resident. And so right there off the bat, I think as we reviewed these documents together, as the different focus groups folks were reading through them, they were saying, there's information in here that is important to me and my community that's not being addressed. And so right there we have, built-in bias. But Samra, I don't know if that goes back to what you were saying earlier.
It does a little bit. There are more layers to it as well. And I think we've talked about this now in private, but there are examples of like what could be in those notices that would be helpful to residents. And they include things like telling us about the process, or telling us ways that a company is deviating from something, or telling us if there are better alternatives. For example, if a company comes and proposes something using X component, and we know that there are, 5 better, more pollution efficient components out in the market, why isn't this company choosing to use those? Why are they choosing this? That is an argument that people can make, that residents can make, but they don't know that. They don't know that that's a rule or an argument that they could use. They don't know that, for example, like a company wants to do a permit here, they use a radar, air radar that's 10 miles away, but there's one that's literally 10 feet away from them. Why aren't they using that monitor, and they're using one that's further away? That's another thing that they could contest or object to, but residents don't know that. And so what you end up having is frustrations, because permit after permits get passed, and then hearing after hearing happens, and you have an incident where like a few years ago, the entire community comes out, they're upset, they're screaming about this, another permit, yet another permit getting passing, but they don't know what type of objections they could actually pose that might help, that EGLE could actually say, you know what, that's a valid argument. We might deny this permit for this reason. Instead, you have a community full of frustrations, full of decades of permit after permit getting passed without their ability to say no. So one of the things that's missing, I think, is also content. EGLE should tell residents, this is why this company is deviating from this rule, or this is an objection that you could pose, or this is what rule they're breaking, and we are allowing them to break. Do you object to this or not? So I think there's content component as well as kind of the actual language.
So actually, Sam, that's an awesome tie-in, because we're at our time. Obviously, we're a little bit over, but it's an awesome tie-in to what we're going to be talking about at 5:15. So your frustration is definitely something that I think even staff will sometimes get on board with. And at 5:15, we're going to be talking about meaningful engagement in the air permit process. So we're going to be hearing from Teresa Landrum, who is an environmental advocate on the east side of the state and is wonderful, as well as Nick Leonard, who is also an advocate for the environment and environmental lawyer over there, and kind of talking about how do you do what you just talked about? How do you, as a resident or an environmental advocate, look at these and have meaningful engagement in that process? So I'm really excited for that session too. I will be there. Hopefully we'll see all of you there as well. Thanks for sticking on with us for a couple minutes. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Natalie. Thank you, April. Really appreciate it. As we know, this conversation on plain language could go on and on and on, and I think we're going to be talking about it in the years to come. So thanks everybody for your efforts today, and we hope to talk to all of you soon.
Thanks, Jen. Take care, everyone.